Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to your morning huddle. Now, please welcome to the stage your host, Bonnie Bernstein.
Enjoying Vegas? All right, raise your hand if you actually got to bed before midnight last night. One word, lame. I did, but I had to work and I have to be sort of coherent. Thank you everybody for coming out. It's been last night was amazing and we've got an incredible crowd for the first time out. Want to introduce our panelists. We've got an incredible group of ladies and gentlemen, well, ladies, including me, and gentlemen. So we all know Matthew Berry. Let's bring him up on the stage. We're going to do a little John Hanson action. John, come on out. Liz Loza, who just did a brand spanking new deal with Yahoo, so you're going to be seeing her and hearing her a whole lot more. And we're going to mix in a couple players, Kyle Orton, as well as Brandon Stokely. Brandon, we introduced you. Anytime, buddy.
There he is.
All right. Here's what I think is really important for this sort of panel. We have incredible folks on this stage, but ultimately we're here to educate you and to enlighten you. So, rather than doing the let's talk to these guys for 40 minutes and then throw it out to the audience for Q&A for the last 10 minutes, I'd really like this to be a conversation. If you hear something and you have a specific follow-up, I'd love you to raise your hand and just ask. Because chances are, if you're wondering, a lot of other folks in the audience are wondering too. Wow, I don't know what that was. Is that your brother? Okay. We have, I believe, a microphonista somewhere. Do we have you? I'm sorry, I didn't get your name. Allie? Ellie. Ellie, okay. Ellie is our microphonista. So she's going to be keeping an eye out. If you have a question, raise your hand. If you're too scared to ask a question, I'm also on Twitter, so if there's something you're curious about but you don't want to actually ask the question, hit me on Twitter. I'm at Bonnie Bernstein, and I'll be keeping an eye on this, so I can hopefully ask some of your questions too. So I think that's pretty much it. I wanted to actually ask each one of our panelists, I know players don't play, what's your favorite type of fantasy league to play in, Barry?
That question could have gone a lot of ways, Bonnie.
What's your favorite fantasy league to play in?
Interesting pause. We are in Vegas.
Yes.
My favorite kind of fantasy football league or just in general? I mean, I love fantasy.
I'd say, is football your favorite?
Football's my favorite.
I'm going to assume it is because you like
Football's
write books about it and stuff.
But I listen, I do a fantasy movie league. I'm a whore for all sorts of fantasy, so I do it all. In terms of what's my favorite type of fantasy playing, like, I don't know that I have a favorite type. I like them all. I mean, I will tell you that this sounds like I'm a company homer, but I legitimately like 10-team standard leagues in ESPN because I think it's interesting because you have real decisions. The waiver wire is filled with stars. Like, you're making real decisions every week about, like, am I playing Joik Bell in my flex? Whereas like in your deeper leagues, like that's no choice. Like you have those conversations, right? But I'm in a 16-team war room, the PPR league with all that we talked about with Schefter. Like, that's my most intense league. I love that. I love that league. So, and I'm in a league with, the Stern Show, which is the other league that I care about. And that's
that must be
fun. Well, but it's 6 points per touchdown pass, and it's like super deep benches, and like, so, I don't know, I love it all.
How about you, John?
And we're keeping score, I love it.
I love the draft. That is the greatest day of the year.
Agreed.
So I've always been more of a draft guy as opposed to an auction. My favorite league, if you will, would be a 12-teamer. I like the 12-team PPR. However, and I've been doing this my 21st year, and I'll fully admit it's an embarrassment, but I just did my first auction.
I was going to ask if any of you done auction leagues.
And I must say, and my contention's always been that a reader or a listener can pretty much take everything I'm offering and apply it to an auction. I put that to the test, and I really enjoyed it. So it was awesome. You can, if you want a guy, 100%, he can be yours. And there's different strategy involved. My team ended up looking very similar to what a normal team would be, but auction is pretty cool. If you've never done it,
I love auction. It's unfortunately not. I do 2 leagues that are auction. To me, it's the truest form of skill because again, like one person this year is going to get Adrian Peterson, or Jamal Charles, right? But in an auction, everyone has a shot at every player.
Have you ever done an auction league, Liz?
I have done an auction league, but my favorite is actually a super flex league because I like to maybe start 2 quarterbacks because I think we can play with strategy. Sometimes draft strategy gets a little bit tired. There's a constant debate of, do we take a quarterback like Andrew Luck or Aaron Rodgers early, or do we wait on a guy with a nice high floor like Matt Ryan in like the 6th round? So I like to play the super flex so I can throw in another quarterback. I can take a flyer on a guy like Kyle Orton last year and
That's a real flyer.
see what's happening. So I kind of like to mix it up. And then to John's point, for people who really, really like drafting, the best ball is a really fun format. And that's just you draft your team, no waiver wire management, and whoever drafted the most solid team is the one who turns out the winner.
By the way, just to interrupt real quickly, just show of applause. How many people had Sammy Watkins last year on their team? Can you guys thank Kyle Orton for saving his ass? Like, 'cause save your draft pick right there. Can you give Kyle Orton some love? For the love of God.
Well, that
Kyle's
actually,
brother is here.
Matthew, that's a great way to tee up Kyle, because we were talking in the green room. When you're bringing in new receivers and you're trying to develop chemistry with them, and now you've got, not only are you seeing more dual threat quarterbacks more than ever in college, but you're also dealing with receivers who are coming from dual quarterback experiences. So what's that like for you, trying to get a guy on board and think differently?
Well, I guess, certainly if you have a lack of experience with a guy, lack of timing with a guy, it's always, in my opinion, I've been around a lot of different places, it's always easier for a quarterback and receiver to throw to size, right? So if you're coming in a new situation and, you got those big receivers where you can kind of throw the ball up and throw to size, a lot more easier than throwing to some of the smaller, faster guys where it's, truly a timing type of deal. That stuff takes so long that, maybe an off season, but, certainly 2 or 3, but, those tall guys make it a lot easier to throw to.
Having worked with a couple different quarterbacks throughout your career, Brandon, who's the easiest to get on the same page with?
Well, Peyton's probably the hardest, but once you get it, he makes it the easiest.
And if you don't get it, you're never going to see the ball again.
Right. I would say probably early in my career, just because just breaking into the NFL, it's such a different game. It's such a big adjustment. You're thinking so much. It's so hard to make that leap. And so I think early on, the adjustment with, I had probably 5 or 6 quarterbacks in Baltimore early in my career. That was tough, because you're not developing that chemistry. There is no development. Like Kyle said, it's easier for a quarterback to throw to size, big guys, because those guys can just make plays. And for me, I'm not that type of guy. So I need the chemistry, the off season, the preparation. And if I don't have that, that hurts me. And so if I don't have that relationship with the quarterback, that's to me is a detriment to me. But if you're a big physical receiver, Brandon Marshall, this year going to the Jets, I think he'll do fine because they're just going to throw it up to him and he can just make plays.
Yeah. Did you want to, I saw it, did you want to throw something?
Well, I was just going to ask, is chemistry for a wide receiver quarterback more important for a slot receiver?
I think so for sure.
Well, actually, I'm going to flip the question that I asked Kyle on its head. So as somebody who's dealt with prototypical pocket passer, guys who are more mobile, how much more challenging is it for a receiver when you've got somebody who's going to break contain, he may be out there, you're going to run your route, but it may be a while to get the ball. From a receiver standpoint, Brandon, how difficult is that for you?
Well, I always enjoyed playing with a quarterback that could get out of the pocket and just extend plays. You can just get
Like
10,
Peyton.
50, yeah, like a Peyton. He's always got out of the pocket a lot.
Yeah.
Kept those
Constantly
plays
extending
alive.
plays,
Yeah.
scrambling around. Yeah.
You could be covered, and the next thing you know, you got a catch, and so you get 15 or 20 more catches in a year playing with a mobile quarterback, and things didn't have to be on script. Your routes didn't have to be as precise, and but I think playing with being a slot receiver, the timing with the quarterback is so much more important because you have so many more option routes, choice routes. where if you're not on the same page, it's an interception or it's an incompletion and you're punting the ball. It's third down and you got to put it on the foot. So I think for a slot receiver, it definitely is a lot more important to have that chemistry with a quarterback.
One of the similarities between fantasy drafts and real life NFL drafts is the struggle as to whether you go with best player available or if you go with need. So, Liz, we'll start with you. What's your thought process on that?
Well, I like to set my own ranking. First of all, I like to mock on whatever site that I'm playing fantasy, preferably Yahoo. Sorry. So I like to
Shameless
do.
plugging is allowed in this room, by the way.
So I like to do a couple of mocks, see if there are any patterns that I'm finding, and then set my own rankings. Because the problem with best player available is that best is obviously very subjective. So I might be all in on OBJ all the time. Somebody else might want to see him do it another year and have, I don't know, AJ Green higher. I might think Alshon Jeffrey's a great value. Someone else might really want mega. So I think you need to set your rankings and then also be willing to defer to them if Andrew Luck, I just did an MFL 10, and Andrew Luck fell to me in the third round. Now, normally I like to wait on quarterback, but it's the third round and Andrew Luck is available. He is by far the best player on the board, so I am going to take him. And then adjust. So you have to be willing to adjust, but also know who you like and who you don't.
I'm big on best player available simply because, as we all know in fantasy, it is all about having as many impact players as you possibly can. You want high impact players. So drafting this year, if I go with a couple of running backs and a receiver, or a couple of receivers and a running back, and then I'm looking at an okay number 2 running back, an okay number 2 wide receiver in that round, I'm going to be more inclined to take Travis Kelce, because if I get him, secure an impact player, and then maybe hit on a pick or two later or work the waiver wire and get a productive player for that spot, now I'm cooking with some gas. So I'm pretty big on best player available.
You know, Matthew, Liz said something I want to ask you.
Okay.
OBJ. At what point does a player have a large enough body of work that you can gauge consistency, which enables you to figure out where you want to take somebody?
I don't know that I think it's different for every player, right? I think it's different for every player. I certainly think, Odell Beckham Jr. has 12 games. I don't think we need more of a body of work to know like this guy is like a crazy, insane, talented player, and it's going to be one of the best wide receivers in the game. The question becomes, where do you rank him, right? And so like you can make the argument he should be the number 1 wide receiver this year. Guy missed all of training camp, played 12 games on half a hamstring, and had the second best season of a rookie since Randy Moss, like in NFL history. And so now full season, everything like that. But again, right, it's 12 games and Victor Cruz wasn't there, and is their defense a little bit better, and coordinators have had the whole offseason to look at him. So I take it on a player-by-player basis. I don't want to sit here and say, after 2 seasons, after 4 seasons, because you just never know. I think the book was, quote unquote, the book was written on Justin Forsett prior to last year, right? Top 10. So I think it's somewhat on sample size, but I don't think you have to take a look at situation, at scheme, at opportunity, at why things happen the way they did for previous seasons for success, and are those same factors in place and repeatable. So in the case of Odell Beckham Jr., I'm as my wide receiver 6. I probably won't own him this year because there'll be somebody that wants to reach for him. It's hard for me to justify taking him, as great as I think he is, over somebody that's done it like a Dez or a Demarius or even a Jordy Nelson or Julio, guys that have produced. Antonio Brown obviously is my number 1. Yeah, so all those guys. 2 points I just want to real quickly touch on in terms of one thing I think Liz said that's very smart, and one thing that I think John said both very smart, but one thing specifically I want to comment on. First off, Liz talking about the ADP of specific sites. I think that is so crucial, because the ADP of a site is largely influenced by the default rankings. So ESPN may have a player at wide receiver 20, and Yahoo might have him at wide receiver 28, and that's a 3-round difference. And so if you're drafting on ESPN, he may go in the 6th or 7th round or whatever, and on Yahoo goes 3 rounds later. And knowing where, so I think Fantasy Football Calculator does a good job of sort of aggregating all the ADP. I know, John, your site does a lot with ADP as well. But that, I think, is super important, is knowing where you're drafting and knowing where the ADP on your site that you're going to draft differentiates from where your own personal rankings are, because I think that's where you find the value and that's where you find the delta. And I'm with John on best player available as well. Again, you see people like schemes and opportunities change, for example, whatever, the C.J. Andersons of the world, the Justin Forsetts, there's always going to be players that come in the league. So the more building blocks you have around guys as the situation changes, John, I think your point, you're better off.
You,
Yes.
you pass on that running back 2 or your flex in favor of a stud tight end, and then you pick up C.J. Anderson on the waiver wire, who came out of nowhere and put up top 10 numbers. Now you win. Now you win the league.
But
So that's why I like the best player available.
The tricky thing about best player available, though, and why I believe, again, that you have to set your own rankings is because you don't want to reach for something, right? And I do think, to Matthew's point, that I always like to have the FF Calculator ADP data open as I'm drafting, because if I see Travis Kelce in the 5th round, I'll take him there. That, to me, isn't a reach. But in the 3rd round, I do think that would be a reach. So he might, yes, he's going to be the best player available in the 3rd round, especially at the tight end position if you want to move into positional scarcity, not trying to run your show.
There is a fine line, though, between not reaching and if you're sold on a player, especially in high stakes. If you're sold on a player, you almost have to take him around before because someone will be proactive.
Well, high stakes draft, I think, is a different thing. And then you need some more security because obviously these stakes are higher.
I'm going to bring the
But that's where
players in for a
ADP
second.
comes in, to both your points. That's just knowing that.
There's been a lot of discussion as to what DeMarco Murray's productivity in Philadelphia is going to be relative to what it was last year in Dallas, and we're going to get to that in a little while. But it brings up the whole question of the quality of an offensive line, which we all know the guys in the trenches are probably some of the most unheralded players on the team. Kyle, if I said to you, you could have a great wide receiving core or you could have a great offensive line, which one would you prefer and why?
Well, I think the right answer would be, offensive line in terms of, certainly being able to run the ball into the end zone is always the easiest path. And then for a quarterback, if your team is allowed to run the ball into the end zone, you're going to have some great looks to throw some red zone touchdowns. So, I think all these quarterbacks that really, dominate down there, they always have the ability to run it in, which gives them some, decent looks to throw the ball in. And then just in terms of your receiver core, there's so many guys, there's so much depth at wide receiver that, you give any of those guys, that half a second more, second more to get open. It's a lot of, you're talking, a window of 2.5 seconds to get open or a window of, maybe call it 4 seconds to get open on some of these teams. It's a big difference.
Cast of characters is obviously really important. And for a receiver too. I mean, if you're the number 1 guy in your team and there's nobody else that a DB has to worry about protecting, you're going to get doubled all the time. So, I mean, and you've had all sorts of different scenarios throughout your career, Brandon, but how essential is that? Having experienced, being on a team like Indy that one season when you and Marvin Harrison and Reggie Wayne all had 10 touchdown, 1,000-yard seasons. I mean, that is a rarity.
Yeah, no, it makes your life a lot better when you have other great receivers around you and they can take the pressure off of you. When I played with those guys in Indy, it was any given week, one of us was going to have a big game. We just didn't know who it was going to be. And that's a great feeling. You know that they can't stop you all. And when I was in Seattle for that year, we didn't have a true number 1 receiver. So it makes life a lot more difficult for you if nobody can just make a play, off schedule, right? If you don't have that guy that can just, no matter what they do, they're not going to stop them. The Brandon Marshalls, the Marvin Harrisons, they can't stop you. And if you don't have that threat, it's tougher on the slot receiver, it's tougher on the quarterback, and going back to the offensive line, I've been in situations to where I've had quarterbacks say, hey, I know this route's supposed to be at 12, but I'm going to need you to cut it down a couple yards just because they don't have the faith in their offensive line. And it makes things a lot harder because you're used to running that at 12, and now all of a sudden you're adjusting on the fly, but that's what you have to do when your offensive line is shaky.
Yep. I got a Twitter question coming in from, I should have brought my glasses, Brett Campbell, getting old. Fantasy Combine question, Keeper League. I get to keep one. Odell, Jeremy Hill, Julio Jones, Julius Thomas. Who should I keep?
All right, by the way, that guy's full of it. He just wanted to brag that that's his keepers. He doesn't want advice at all. He just wanted you to read. That's his keeper list.
Between Hill and Beckham for me, it's a tough call.
It's a very tough call. I honestly would go with I think it's, for me, it's Beckham. In terms, I'm assuming it's is it a dynasty league or a keeper league? Because just in dynasty in general, I prefer wide receivers over running backs because I think their shelf life
Longevity.
is much longer.
Wait, where's
So-
Brandon,
Brett? Where's Brett Campbell? What kind of league is it? Keeper league?
PPR? Yes. Okay. Yeah, I'd agree. I'd probably go with.
And no
Beckham.
penalty for keeping any of them? Like, so you
Your
can only
life really
well, if you can
sucks,
only keep him for
doesn't it?
1 year, honestly, and if it's PPR, I might actually keep
do the
Julio
Hill.
then. If it's 1 year, I have Julio ranked higher than Beckham this year. I think Hill's going to have a monster year, but I think in a PPR, Julio, to me, if you're only keeping one of those guys for 1 year, Julio would be my choice.
And even if it's a couple of years, when in doubt, look to see who the consensus of his ranking for this year, because it is still about the here and now in a keeper league. But Brandon, let me ask you this: the lingering hamstring issues with Odell Beckham, how much of a concern? It's obviously a concern. How much of a concern is it, though?
It's a big concern, especially if you're looking like you are to maybe keep him for the year. It's big decisions. I think that has to drop him down. I mean, what would y'all do with somebody like that? I mean, does it drop him down a lot, a little bit? I mean, because his talent is so high, obviously he's going to be picked high, but that's got to be a big concern.
Well, it's the particular injury too, because hammies are so delicate
And for a
so
receiver,
easy
you
to
know,
reach.
and that-
For a
that's all you-
receiver,
For a speed
you're
receiver.
cutting, you're
Yes.
trying like full speed. It's like, I mean, that's.
Tom Coughlin's head almost exploded last summer. They were so frustrated with that hamstring.
Well, if they could just get.
But I do think my friend Bob Harris likes to say that he's injury agnostic, and I like to toe that line to a certain extent.
Injury agnostic.
Because I feel like you've got talent. These are professional athletes. They're taking care of their bodies, and like his upside is so high. I mean, Matthew said it,
Yeah.
So
But could not disagree with that statement more. And I'm
Well-
curious, Brandon and Kyle, your thoughts on that. And this is what I mean. What I don't, in terms of being injury agnostic, because I believe staying healthy is a skill, and I believe there are certain players in the NFL that are better at that. Listen, fluke injuries happen, but listen, you take one look at Robert Griffin III and Russell Wilson.
Who are just-
I mean, like, you know what I mean?
And
Like,
I
you
always
think they're gonna stay
I
healthy
always
this
say
year.
that some players have the DNA to play NFL football and avoid injury, and some
Right.
don't.
But everybody said that about DeMarco Murray last year, and he was a beast. And
I think going back to that, and the longer my career went on, the more I realized how much more I had to put into taking care of my body to stay healthy. And as a young player, it's hard to understand that, what you need to do to week in and week out, the time and the effort you need to put in to stay healthy. And some guys, they don't get it.
And Brendan and Kyle, I think you guys can speak to this. You don't have to throw anyone in the bus, but I'm sure both of you guys had long careers. You played with a number of teammates. I'm sure there are teammates that got it and understand it is a job, and there are people that are out to 3 a.m. drinking and chasing whatever, and like just don't, it's come so easy to them for so long, and at some point it just it catches up with them.
And there are guys like Rashad Jennings. That kid works his butt off, and he still gets injured basically every year. So
Yeah, it happens
there
a lot,
are
yeah.
guys, if you are typically getting injured, that's probably going to continue. I feel.
Quarterback, you just learn to chuck and duck, keeps you on the field a little bit longer.
So injuries are one of the scenarios that fantasy owners constantly have to be assessing and sort of weighing the inherent risk with that sort of stuff. But there are other scenarios, like let's just say Kubiak coming on in Denver, and we all know Kubiak likes to run the ball. We all know that Peyton, while he's still Peyton, it's so hard for me to say this, but he's a little long in the tooth. So can each one of you, and Liz, we'll start with you, is there one particular scenario that you have a tried and true player, a player who had success last year, but either, because of injury, changing coach, changing personnel around him, where you may have to be a little bit careful and maybe aren't going to draft somebody as high as you might if you just looked at the history?
Well, everything changes, and I think personnel changes are a huge thing to look at. LaShawn McCoy is the first player that comes to mind. I do think his receptions are going to go up this year, but I mean, we talk about the narrative this year is that DeMarco Murray was run to the ground in Dallas. But if you look at LaShawn McCoy, I mean, he has a lot of tread on those tires. So he's someone that I feel like, yes, he's falling to a good value, and he has a lot of talent, and I like him a little bit more in PPR because of the receptions. But he's someone that I think you have to weigh. Yes, the volume's going to be there, but you have to weigh all of the factors. And right now, Buffalo has a lot of question marks, and sure, there's going to be dumping off from whoever they have under center, but I don't know if you're going to get quality production from him this year.
Well, to me, it's Matt Forte with Mark Trestman out in Chicago. And Trestman not only loves throwing it to his running backs, I'm good friends with Rich Gannon, who play with him. And we talked the day they signed him. We talked about, Charlie Garner. Remember that year he caught 90 balls? Yeah, Trestman. Matt Forte, draft Matt Forte. Well, Trestman's gone. John Fox, in the past, has utilized a dual backfield of sorts. They do seemingly want to get someone else involved. But just as a general statement, when I look at a player, I add up the positives, I add up the negatives. Forte's a great guy, unbelievable career. Still looks very good by the eyeball test, but they did have struggles running the football. Trestman's gone. He's 30, 800 touches in college, plus everything in the pros. A lot of work. I'm ready to kind of bail. I'd rather jump ship a year too early than a year too late on a Forte.
I always say that. I'd rather be off the bandwagon a year too early than a year too late. I agree with you both on McCoy and Forte. I've ranked both those players lower than I have in a long time. For me, Drew Brees. So you look at sort of what's happened to the Saints in this offseason. So losing Kenny Stills, losing Jimmy Graham, losing Pierre Thomas. Those are three of the top 5 target guys from last year for Drew Brees that are no longer there. Here's some stats. I looked this up, make sure I got this right. So Saints ran the ball on 36% of their offensive plays last year. It's the highest rush percentage since 2011. Saints were especially run heavy in the red zone, running on 44% of the red zone plays last year, most since Peyton was there, since Sean Payton was there. And Drew Brees only attempted 83 red zone passes last season, his fewest in a season since his first year in New Orleans in 2006. And that was with Jimmy Graham, Kenny Stills, Pierre Thomas. They added C.J. Spiller, obviously, but I think everyone looks at Jimmy Graham going to Seattle. I think people forget that they got Max Unger back, who's one of the best run-blocking centers in the NFL. They want to run the ball, and they made re-signing Ingram a priority. Brees is getting older, so you've got Brandon Cooks and Marcus Colston there. And I mean, I know people like Josh Hill's a sleeper or whatever, but Cooks, who I think has a world of talent, but unproven, a rookie guy who played half his year last year. So to me, I think Drew Brees, look, he's still Drew Brees, but a guy that consistently was a top 3 fantasy quarterback. I think he's right there in sort of that, 5 to 7 to 8 range. I think he's in that Matt Ryan range. I think he's in that Tony Romo range, which to think about somebody like Drew Brees in that range, I think is...
I think it goes back to, look how much his offensive line over the last 3 years has deteriorated, around him. He had the 2 best guards in all of football, when he was... So I think you go back and look, 3 years ago when he was really putting up the numbers to last year, I bet you he's got a second difference in time. So rather looking at all the weapons, I think his offensive line and maybe the center will come in and play
But he's
a big
better
role.
at run blocking than pass blocking. That's the kind of
Yeah,
thing.
no
I
doubt.
think they want to run.
Well, and I think, you get down there now, they don't got to blitz him because they feel like they can get a good pass rush with 4 guys. So he's seen a lot more cover 2, so they're going to run the ball into cover 2, so I think that's why,
You don't have the big receiver.
The reps in the red zone has gone way down. I just don't think that they're forced to blitz him
Still have
anymore.
Colston there.
They still have Colston there, but I think
But
the
you don't
point
have
is, I
the
think we're
Jimmy
all...
Graham, the big guy, to just throw it up.
Colston
When things
Thomas.
Jimmy
hit the
Graham is
fan,
such a difference
it's
maker.
nice to have Jimmy Graham where you just toss it up to him and he's going to make plays for you. You don't have that. That's a huge
Throw
difference.
to size, right? That's what Kyle said. You throw to size.
And nobody's going to blitz you when you got Jimmy Graham because what a horrible matchup, on a safety. You never want to get in that situation, So,
Now you're not
it
worried.
just, it trickles down so much.
That all said, though, it's not like Marty Schottenheimer's coaching the Saints. It's still Sean
But
Payton.
where do you have him ranked?
I have him actually at 4. I think, to your point, his days of putting up massive digits are over. But I still think Drew Brees is going to throw for over 4,000 with 35 touchdowns. And you're right about Max Unger as a good run blocker. But one of the reasons I'm optimistic, they also use the number 1 pick on a tackle. So that helps. But they pressured Brees up the gut a lot last year.
Sure.
That really got to him.
Sure.
And that's how you get to the great ones.
Yeah, sure.
Brady, Peyton, right up the gut.
Yeah, sure.
So I like that addition. I still think Brees is going to be pretty productive, but not the just outrageous numbers that we're used to.
I just think he's in a different tier this year. And previously, Rodgers and Brees, Rodgers, Manning, Brees, he was in that the number 1 tier, and I think he's a tier below.
I got a question for y'all 3. Being from Denver, the offense, Kubiak coming in, C.J. Anderson this year. How, he obviously last year he was a stud. I think, just being a football fan and kind of watching on Sundays, I think he's an awesome running back. He can catch out of the backfield. He makes plays after contact. With this new offense, what do you think from him this year?
Well, look, we all know that Gary Kubiak loves to run the rock. Both guys are a good fit. C.J. Anderson a little bit more laterally elusive than Monty Ball, a little faster. I am, though, curious to see Monty Ball because I do think he could carve out a little bit of a role here, and I don't think he was ever healthy last year. He was a number 2 pick out of Wisconsin. He's not overly talented, but I don't think we saw anything close to the real Monty Ball at any point last year.
I agree that, I mean, I think Monty Ball has sort of been injured, but my sort of take is I love C.J. Anderson. I have him, I think, at running back 7 without my rankings in front of me. Certainly a top 10 fantasy running back, but you tell me, Brandon and Kyle, I want you to talk to me about this as well. Peyton likes C.J. Anderson. Like, if Peyton don't like you, you're not getting on that field, right? You've been in huddles with Peyton Manning, and Kyle, you know which running backs have your back when in
sure.
blitz pickup and everything like that. And like, C.J. Anderson, to my eye, did nothing wrong last year down the stretch. And as he gets Peyton another year older and they want to run the ball a little bit more, I just don't see, but they're still going to probably do hurry up. Like Peyton, I
Right.
just don't see Monty Ball getting on the field as long as C.J. Anderson's
Right.
healthy.
I agree with you. You know, when Peyton feels comfortable with a running back, right, Kyle, quarterback, when you have that running back on third down that you know is going to pick up the blitzes or first
Or
and
beat the
second, right,
linebacker.
yeah,
Or beat
and
the
is going to know what he's doing, especially with Peyton. If you don't know what you're doing, if you miss a blitz pickup, you might not see the field again. So that's very important. And you can tell he's very comfortable with C.J. Anderson.
And we struggled last year in Buffalo when Fred Jackson went down, and it wasn't because of the running the ball or nothing like that. I mean, just third down alone, it set us back so far.
I want to get into analytics because big data and analytics has become such a huge part of fantasy. But for a lot of people, it's really overwhelming. So I was curious if there's maybe one particular stat, piece of data that you have started incorporating in your draft strategy that you've found to be particularly useful that our friends in the audience can start keeping an eye on too.
I like for receivers, especially in PPR leagues, I like average depth of target, I think is really, really useful. And I also, we've been talking about it this entire panel, I like to look at PFF's, Pro Football Focus's, O-line rankings and their pass blocking, run blocking. I think that's really helpful, especially when you're looking at the matchups from week to week.
You have to be careful. I'm not a huge numbers guy. I absolutely look at simple things like yard per carry. I do think that's revealing. Yard per catch, obviously. Receivers, catch rate's a big one for me.
Targets.
What's the percentage of targets that you're catching? For example, Sammy last year for you guys, he only caught like 55% of the balls thrown his way, and some of that was
It was DJ Manuel's fault.
guy you replaced.
DJ Manuel's fault.
Exactly.
Call.
But that to me tells me there's kind of room to grow. But I do look at the numbers. There's no question. But I still kind of lean a little bit more toward understanding these systems and what the coaches want, understanding the roles, getting that type of information, and quite simply the eyeball test. I mean, my eyeball test is still kind of what I lean on more than anything.
So I think it's a combination for me. Like, I think stats can be very, very useful. I'm doing a panel later today that's called 100 Facts. It's all stat-based. But I'm also a believer that stats can say anything you want them to say, right? And so I think it's a little bit like, I remember seeing a speech once with Charles Barkley, and he was doing a panel with Daryl Morey, who's the general manager of the Rockets, Dork Elvis, as Bill Simmons likes to call him, and a huge analytics guy. And Daryl Morey was talking about all these analytics that had gone into the Rockets' success. And Barkley was like, I don't need a bunch of analytics to tell me Dwight Howard and James Harden are really good. You talk about analytics, like you guys got good when you signed Dwight Howard and James Harden, Dwight Howard. So I think it's a little bit of both, right? So I would say, I think for running backs, I think yards after contact is helpful. I think if you want to talk about offensive lines, I think it's yards before contact is
Clean yards by running
Right.
backs behind O lines.
So I think those things can be helpful, but I think and Brandon and Kyle, I think you guys can talk about this as well, like in terms of to your point, John, it's every player's value is tied to the scheme, the play call, the offensive line making the blocks, a wide receiver blocking downfield for running back on a spring,
I would pay so
quarterback
much more.
making the right read, right?
If it was me, I'd look so much more into the coordinator, quarterback synergy? How long have they been together? You know, how long has everybody else in the system been together? So, you know, with Bradford going to the Eagles, you know,
Right.
that's one guy changing, right? When I went from Chicago to Denver, we had 11 guys on offense all learning the new system, right? It's a little bit easier for Sam going to Philly, right? He's one guy now. Does he have a lot of work to do? Sure, but there's a lot of synergy still left over, right? At that team. But you know, I would pay a lot more attention to, hey, you know, has this quarterback and these two receivers been together for 3 or 4 years? Because when it hits the fan, those are the guys that the quarterback's going to go to.
I'm really curious about running back strategy. Because
But
there are,
can I interrupt for 1 second? I'm
Sure.
just curious about, just, so you were brought in, I mean, like, very publicly, right? They weren't happy with E.J. Manuel's play, and you
Yeah,
come in
sure.
and you come in late, right? And so how much were you, like, basically told, like, look, Kyle, get the ball to Sammy, seriously, whatever you do? Or how much is that you just looking around the field and like who's my best shot at success? And
Yeah,
Sammy's just,
I never really tried to, you know, I just saw every play as a kind of a jigsaw puzzle, and wherever that puzzle took me, you know, that's where I was going to try to throw the ball to. You know, I think Sammy's a really unique guy to look at, not just because I played with him, but, you know, there's a guy that he was an outside receiver. He played one position. He was a young guy. He could only play one position, right? You know, and there's a lot of people, move him into the slot, you know, do this, do that. He had a tough time. You know, it's a hard gig for young players to learn the game plan at one position, you know, so they weren't going to move him. And there's a guy where you could truly get a true double team. The defense knew where the guy was going to line up. And when we played a team, they took him out, you know, and you could say, you know, throw it to him, they took him out, right? And so if you have a real guy that, you know, hey, he's been around, he can move around, you know, you actually have a chance to get the ball to that guy on a regular basis.
It's really helped Roddy White. He's been a guy
Sure.
that moved around for the last 5-6 years.
No
getting
doubt.
open.
I don't, some of these guys that, you know, just play the outside, I don't know how you catch 100 passes.
Hey, Steve Smith told me the reason that his production dropped, they took him out.
Yeah.
They took him out last year.
No doubt.
you know, the slot is a unique position. You're playing in crowded space all of the time. Brandon, can you speak to maybe some of the intricacies of playing the position that, you know, maybe the average fan watching might not realize?
Well, I think in the slot, you know, you definitely have to pay attention to the details a lot more, your route depth. And I think looking at it from a fantasy player, you want to look at the defense. What does the defense play, you know, when a team goes a 3 wide on first or second down?
Or if they're heavy blitz?
Right. You know, do they like to blitz a lot? And is that going to give you, you know, more opportunities down the field? How's that offensive line versus the blitz, you know, when you're doing weekly lineups? And 3 wides early, is that going to bring in a nickel, or are they going to stay base? And then some teams, you know, when I was with Denver and Indy, if you went base early and you just stayed your base package, your 4-3, you know, didn't bring a nickel back in, well, we were going to keep you in that. We weren't going to let you substitute on 3rd down. And some teams, even when you go 2 tights early in when I was with Denver, or even in Indy, they like to go nickel and play nickel. And our game plan was, okay, we're going to go 2 tights. We know this team is going to play nickel against us, so they're taking their linebacker out, and they're bringing in a smaller, you know, defensive back. We're going to pound them all game, and we're going to keep that on the field, and we're just going to run the football. And so as a slot guy, I knew my day was probably going to be short.
Like a guy for me that's really interesting is, and I think he's a great player, is Cole Beasley in Dallas.
Yep.
Right? I think he's an incredible player, great route runner, big plays, you know, and it's just how much is he ever going to get on the field, right? Because do they want to stay in that 2 tight end package with Escobar and Witten, you know, and keep them both on the field, or are they going to let Cole play? You know, and I don't know what they're going to do.
I was just going to say, I think they'll pass a little bit more without DeMarco this year. But it's interesting, like, just going to what you guys are talking about in terms of coordinator history or even player history. Like, a slot guy I love this year who's not being drafted at all or very late in deep leagues is Eddie Royal.
Yep.
Reunited with Jay Cutler.
Yep.
And then you look,
That's a great one.
so he's got Alshon Jeffrey, obviously, but you've got Kevin White. John Fox hates rookies.
Yep.
Like, I'm not convinced Kevin White even gets on the field
Sure.
this year. It might be Marquez Wilson, whoever. But I think Eddie Royal, who's got that connection
Oh, no doubt.
with Cutler, so I think he's a great, like, PPR guy. And then to your point, but like, you know, 3 wide sets or whatever, we know, like, just Kubiak doesn't use the 3 wide receiver. He's always, he's 2 wides and a tight end. So, like, all of us that have been sitting here waiting on Cody Latimer, like, it's going to be an injury or we're waiting a little while.
Although Steve Smith told me the reason he signed with Baltimore is he actually looked at Kevin Walters' production at Zeke, and he was like really intrigued by that. But that's your number 2 receiver. Number 3 in a Kubiak offense, it's just nothing going on there.
Not much.
Right. But so, I mean, you'll see like some people talk about Latimer as a huge jump, but you just like, again, like if you're looking at it, you're like, okay, when is Latimer getting on the field? Like assuming Sanders and Demaryius Thomas are healthy, like
That's not happening.
it's going to be Owen Daniels. It's going to, they go 2 wide and a tight end. They don't do 3 wide.
I like the Eddie Royal reference, and just like Kyle said, when things are tough, and we know Chicago's offensive line isn't very good, he's going to look for somebody that he knows and that he has a great chemistry with, and they've been in Denver together. And Eddie, I think you've seen what he did in San Diego. He's a very reliable receiver, and they're going to be behind a lot, so they're going to be throwing the ball a lot.
And that's a guy you can get dirt cheap. Like
He's had a nice
like,
revitalization. Those last couple of years have been great for Eddie.
All right, let's talk about running backs. You got a lot of teams that are running 2-back systems. I'd love your thoughts on zero running back strategy. Agree, disagree, employ? Does it depend on the league?
I disagree. I was not a zero running back guy, and I do get it that it's a dangerous position. These guys get hit 350, 400 times a year, and injuries definitely happen. But if you did that last year, you missed out on Le'Veon Bell. You didn't get Jamal Charles. You didn't get Eddie Lacy. You didn't get Marshawn Lynch. In other words, the top running back producers. So while I am wary of the running backs, and I only think there are 5 that I feel comfortable taking in the first round, Bell, Peterson, Charles, Lacy, and Lynch, I am more inclined to go wide receiver than ever. But to say, I'm not taking a running back early, I don't really think that's a good idea.
I actually did I did an experiment last year because zero RB was the trendy new draft strategy, and I took my 2 home leagues. I sacrificed them for the benefit of my fantasy
Of
football
your
knowledge.
research. For the benefit of your research, you completely went in the tank.
Same scoring
It's very noble of you.
systems, and I did a triple RB, which is the opposite of zero RB. You went RB, RB, RB. And I did a zero RB, and I ended up at the same place and just had to work the waiver wire the same amount of time. And I did, in my zero RB, I did, as John mentioned, miss out on some of those bigger guys. Had a lot of great wide receivers, but I wasn't getting, there was no RB anchor to my team. So I had to work the waiver wire. I had to, find the boom herons of last season and really, really work. And I do think that's like a huge, we're talking about drafting here, but like the waiver wire is a huge part of winning your league, which I know we'll discuss more in the afternoon, but drafting is great. You also have to every week look at that waiver wire and look at the potential pickups. And the other thing I want to talk about drafting, I want to make sure we hit on this, is as I was doing my mocks and getting into form for draft season, I noticed that, and John, you hit on this, the last half of the first round, let's assume a 12-team league, the amount of elite wide receivers, the Julio Jones, the Antonio Browns, the Calvin Johnsons, the Dez Bryants, those guys, we're in a passing league, but now the ball is getting passed around so much that you don't have those guys who are force-fed, the ball hogs, if you will. There's so much, we talk about positional scarcity, like that elite wide receiver is becoming more and more rare. So if you want to get one of those guys, I absolutely think 6 to 12, you've got to draft one of those guys, and I'm finding amazing value in the 3rd and 4th round at RB2. The Lamar Millers, Justin Forsett. You can get Justin Forsett in the 2nd round. I love him, and
Yeah, I agree.
I would say I'm probably closer to John on this. Look, any draft strategy can work. Like, you could have blown off your draft entirely, but you managed to pick up Odell Beckham, C.J. Anderson, and Justin Forsett last year.
Many paths to a championship.
Right, there's many different ways to win. But zero RB, I don't like the idea of basically saying, I'm going to pass on the least scarce position. I don't like going into a draft saying I'm doing this or doing that. I like to let a draft come to, we've talked about best player available. I am more of somewhere in between. Again, if the way the draft works out that I don't draft a running back until the 3rd round, okay, because of the way players fall to me, that's fine. But I don't like saying basically, I'm definitely not taking a running back until the 7th round or whatever it is. I will tell you that because zero RB requires that basically some of those guys pop, because you're going to get those muddled guys, right? And so for every C.J. Anderson, right, there's also guys like Jonas Gray that everyone rushes to pick up and then does nothing for the rest of the year. So you're banking on, with zero RB, you're banking on some of your lottery tickets popping or you getting to the waiver wire quicker than the rest of your league, and it depends on sort of knowing how your league. I don't like taking that big of a chance. Where I do think zero RB is interesting and sort of a modified thing, and Liz and John, you're sort of hinting at this, I think we're all sort of on the same page, is I think RB2 is a very overrated position. Like, give me a stud, but I think there's a lot of places you can piece together an RB2 over the season with, you know, the four sets, the C.J. Andersons. I mean, Ronnie Hillman was useful for a little while last year, right? There are guys that that will come into the league, you know, or whatever, you know, the Latavius Murrays of the world, right? So I just have here a couple of names for you. If you wanted to go zero RB, or you want to, what it requires you to do is basically to grab a lot of guys that are either in whose draft day value is depressed because of muddled playing time situations, because of injury concerns, that kind of stuff. So here's some guy in no particular order, like very quickly. I think Kyrie Robinson is interesting. Mark Ingram could be hurt, and if it and you know, we don't know what Spiller is. I think that if something were to happen to Ingram, I think you'd see Kyrie Robinson, not Spiller, become the every down back. Andre Williams, you mentioned Rashad Jennings, and Shane Vereen's going to be the passing down back. Like, Andre Williams could be the thumper, and even at the goal line.
Yeah.
Duke Johnson, we talked about him in the early session. Love Duke Johnson. Listen, Bishop Sankey, David Cobb, like, he can't be that bad. Sankey can't be that terrible, right? He possibly could, but you never look. It's one of those guys like Doug Martin. Dejan, you and I were talking around the bar last night about Doug Martin.
Right now.
He's a starter. We talk about Forsett, but Buck Allen in Baltimore, I think, is sort of interesting. You mentioned Boom Herron. I think Boom Herron or Josh Robinson.
I like
you know,
the rookie.
Gore at 32. Whoever's the running back in an Andrew Luck offense, you know, as we talk about scheme, being able to see, this is why the running back in a Peyton Manning offense is always successful.
When you guys look at wide receivers, I mean, would you rather have a guy like, okay, Beckham Jr. or Megatron, or one of these guys that never catch the ball at the line of scrimmage, right? Never. They don't run the screens, right? Or you got Demaryius Thomas, who's going to catch 20 balls, or Jordy Nelson, who's going to catch 20 balls at the line of scrimmage
And then the
in a
yards
season,
after the catch.
and is probably going to have 300 to 400 yards of offense based off of balls caught at the line of scrimmage.
Well, I'd be inclined to lock in that player who's basically has 25 free catches.
Right, I mean, Demaryius Thomas,
Uncontested.
they're gonna run 25 screens to Demaryius Thomas caught at the line of scrimmage. He's going to score on 5 of them this year, right?
Yeah.
He did last year, right? I
It
mean, those are
depends
free.
on
You
the
can't
league
take
then.
that away.
If it's a yardage league, then, or a
But-
type versus
But
a touchdown
some of those
league.
guys, and I know
But
you
those
have
other
wide
guys,
receivers
right?
too.
Megatron
top.
never catches the ball at the line of scrimmage, right? Some of these guys are only catching the ball down the field, you know, but like Atlanta's, you know, some of these guys, they catch a lot of balls at the line of scrimmage, and they're getting a lot of production out of it.
Just to
Great
close
point.
off on the zero running, but you just never want to lock yourself into a plan. And if you say you're not taking a running back with your first 5 picks, well, you're kind of locking yourself into a plan. So I like, and as we've talked about a lot, give me one stud at each position to kind of hang my hat on. And at wide receiver, it's very important this year, as you mentioned, Liz, because it's top heavy. So I have to get one of those top 9 guys: Julio Jones, AJ Green, Demaryius Thomas, Brown, Beckham, Jordy, Cobb.
I'd put
I'll
Alshon
put
Jeffrey
there as well.
in that group this year too.
And when you do that,
Demaryius and
now
Dez,
you're in round
obviously.
3 and 4, and you've got, okay, I've got one stud receiver, I got one stud, maybe I got 2 running backs, but now you're flexible. Now you're not locked into anything.
Yeah.
It's also important, I'm sorry, that we note when you're talking about zero RB, it is most effective obviously for PPR leagues. So let's just make that differential.
And one of the reasons zero running back became popular is because people just didn't have the faith that these running backs can stay on the field. And I do think that's a valid point. And I am wary of the running backs more than ever, but if I'm sold on Marshawn Lynch, which I am, and why wouldn't I be, I'm going to take him if he's right there, the best player.
All
We have
these fantasy hipsters being so injury agnostic, how dare them?
We are just
But,
about at
but it's also important to note that
7
zero RB doesn't mean zero RBs. At some point,
Correct.
you have to draft running backs.
It's wide receiver in the first 3 to 4.
Yeah, so, but we're on the same page. I don't
Okay.
like going in saying I'm blowing off a position.
We're at the 7-minute mark. If you want to get your questions in, you can do so via microphone, or I'm on Twitter at Bonnie Bernstein. Mike Grodsky, guys, and let's do this kind of quickly because I want to get to rookies and sleepers. What percentage of your fantasy season success do you think is based on how well you draft versus or compared to roster management or waiver wire savvy?
I actually think it's higher than it's been recently. We all know the waiver wire is fruitful, and it is, but there actually haven't been a ton of, I picked this guy up in week 2, and he was a stud for the rest of the season. Maybe Odell Beckham later on last year, but it's more piecemeal stuff. It's more kind of rental player for this week, and then he loses his job. So I think the draft is actually, in my opinion, it's been a little bit more important the last 2-3 years. So I'm going to say about 75% on the draft.
I do not agree. I'm sorry, John, I love you,
That's
but
okay.
like, I, especially at like a tight end position, will stream every single week if I need to, and I feel like I would say it's a 50-50, 60-40 split.
I think it's many pieces of the puzzle. I think we've talked about there's many ways to win a championship. I think it's just all about finding value, and whether you find the value on picking a guy like Le'Veon Bell last year who went in the 3rd round and ended up, as best running back in fantasy, or picking up a C.J. Anderson or picking up an Odell Beckham, or streaming tight ends or streaming quarterbacks last year. Listen, getting Andrew Luck in whatever was going probably the 5th or 6th round last year. So it's all about finding value. It's just wherever you find value. You can find value in the draft and during the season.
Rookies. First round, we like to be safe. A lot of times you won't even touch a rookie because they're just getting things under their belts. You have no sense of consistency to speak of other than what they've done in college. Is there a rookie that you would consider taking in the first round?
In the first round?
No.
No.
What round would be the earliest you would take any of these rookies?
I will say that my favorite rookie is Nelson Aguilar if we're looking at the wide receiver position. I know a lot of people like Amari Cooper because he's going to be the focal point of that offense in many ways, but I think Nelson Aguilar presents a better value, and I think he could produce week 1 as a rookie, so he would probably be someone, because of the value when you're looking for it, that I would take.
I think rookies do give you a good opportunity to get value because people are a little skeptical. No body of work, so we don't have much to go off of. This year, though, I like Aguilar as well. I'd probably just look at Todd Gurley. I like Todd Gurley a little
Coming
bit
off the
better
knee, you would
than
still?
Melvin Gordon because Todd Gurley is just a sickening talent. He's incredible.
He's a beast.
And you can get him a couple of rounds later. I'm not a big Melvin Gordon guy.
I have Gordon the highest rated of all the rookies because I do think he has the talent. I certainly think he's the clearest path to fantasy success. I agree that I think Gurley's the better value. I agree with Liz that I think Aguilar is a better value than Amari Cooper. In a PPR league, I would take Cooper. In terms of, to answer your question, in terms of what's the first rookie I'm taking, in a PPR league, the first rookie I'm taking is Amari Cooper. The first rookie I'm taking at running back is Melvin Gordon. But I agree with John and Liz that I think Aguilar and Gurley are better values because they're going later. And we talked about Gurley in the first session with Adam. Gurley's going to be a beast down the stretch.
Look at Mike Evans was like a 9th round pick last year.
Calvin Benjamin.
Same
Everyone
thing.
was talking about Brandon Cooks last year, and Sammy Watkins. And, Evans and specifically Benjamin were sort of more afterthoughts.
Sleepers.
Both those guys are big guys. So,
Yeah.
you just, especially with a rookie. And they were on, both of them, teams that weren't, Tampa and Carolina weren't very, Carolina's pretty good. With Cam Newton, they can throw the ball. But, size-wise, you just throw it up there and those guys are making plays.
The one thing I'll say about rookies, though, is that, I'm not high on Kevin White. We talked about this. John Fox has a long history of just not trusting rookies and just rookie tight ends. Just almost, so Max
avoid
Williams,
those guys.
Second hardest position, I think, to learn than quarterback almost.
Well, yeah, and the young guys aren't going to be in on 3rd down. If you got any threat of pass protection, you're going to put your veteran tight end.
It's also, I think, the most overdrafted position in fantasy, the tight end position.
Sleepers. Matt?
God, how many you want? I just
Give
listed off all those
me
things.
3.
Give you 3. I'll give you 3, and I'll give you 3 at the quarterback position since we're talking about. I said this in the earlier session, but I'll say Sam Bradford. I will say Eagles quarterback, whether it's Sanchez or Bradford, going outside the top 15. I love this stat. Since Chip Kelly took over, only Peyton Manning, Drew Brees, and Andrew Luck have more fantasy points than the Eagles quarterback if you made them into one player. And I think you can talk about zero QB, talk about zero RB, go zero QB. And so I think I love Teddy Bridgewater this year. Starting in week 12 last year when Charles Johnson caught his first touchdown pass. From that point on, Teddy Bridgewater was the 11th best quarterback in fantasy in ESPN standard scoring. And so I think in a Norv Turner offense, now having the full year to learn the playbook, knowing he's the guy, adding Mike Wallace, having a running game. He didn't have a run game last year, but now you've got Peterson, and obviously he's going to see a lot of single coverage because teams are going to stack the box against Peterson. So I think Bridgewater has a big year, and Carson Palmer is a guy that they're going to throw a lot. Guy averaged over 18 fantasy points a game in the 6 games that he played last year that he's fully healthy. Arians wants to run. Arians wants to throw quite a bit. So to me, I think Carson Palmer assuming he's healthy and he looks, so far he looks, they're just going to throw. And, there's a guy that number 6 quarterback last year in fantasy points per game, stretch out over a whole season, and he's going outside the top 15 too.
My breakout quarterback is Ryan Tannehill. I like the steady progression. It's kind of like an old school quarterback ascension.
Love Tannehill.
It's getting better every year. It's
Yeah,
not
little by little,
ridiculous.
yep.
That scheme simply gets guys open. I know 4 of his 5 receivers are new to the team, but they're all better fits for his game. Run after the catch guys. He's a short to intermediate guy. I'll throw out a sleeper quarterback if you're in a super flex league, and people are kind of blown away that I'm going to say this, but I like Geno Smith as a
Guys
deep
stealing my best stuff.
No.
sleeper.
Can I tell you something? You're not crazy at all. Chan Gailey is going to spread that out. It's like,
Absolutely.
I think that's a great call.
Yeah, look what we
with
always
you.
go back to the Tyler Thigpen comparison with KC. He was a top 12 guy.
I
out of
mentioned Gino
nowhere.
on my podcast last week and got laughed at. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm going to be like, John's with me. Good. Yeah.
Some running back. Obviously, I'm with everyone on Forsett. Love him. I'm going to go with Latavius Murray. I'm going to take that shot in the 4th round. I do like Frank Gore a lot. These rookies are going to present real nice values. TJ Yeldon, the Jags are very happy with him. 3 down back, talented kid. We all know about Gurley. Everyone likes Abdullah. I do too. His tape is great. I do love Brandon Cooks. That kid's going to get as many targets as he can
He's
handle.
really talented.
Very
because
talented.
He came
He
from
caught-
a West Coast school.
Steve Smith
Nobody.
style
He
player.
caught 76% of his targets last year, learning on the job in an offense that was a little shaky. And late, right before he got hurt, they started clicking downfield. So I like him a lot. I'm a Mike Wallace guy. I know he's kind of a pain, but every time I watch Mike Wallace, I pop in the tape, he's open. And he's kind of running away from people. I still do like Jarvis Landry as well.
Especially in PPR.
I think he's my bust this year at Jarvis
In
Landry.
PPR?
Zach Bettenberger told me he is a quarterback's best
There's a
friend.
guy to rely on.
And he was, that was his quarterback in college.
Sorry.
And I'll throw out
Did he
another
sell-
name.
But what do we talk about slot guys and knowing guys you have? Tannehill and Landry have a connection.
That's
I mean,
That
he may
is
not.
a Bill Lazor manufactured offense. He is not fast enough. He's got more. There are more targets to feed, more mouths to feed. I totally think he's busting. I think he's overvalued.
Well,
you can get him
Jordan
late grade.
Matthews is
He's
slow.
going to pick up a lot with that tight end leaving, though.
All right,
Cameron.
we're
Jordan
at
Cameron's
0,
not out.
John.
What's
So
that? Jordan Cameron's not
Liz,
out.
just
With Charles Clay leaving, he was injured like half the year.
Hey, I'll just,
I like
while
that.
you're trying to do
I
it,
like
real
that.
quickly, I'll say we talked about rookies.
Yeah, I
I'm
got
with you on
feisty about that
Tannehill
one.
and Devontae Parker. You talk about Gurley being a beast down the stretch. I think Devontae Parker in the second half of the year.
And he missed, like 4 games last year?
Devontae
Louisville?
Parker, because of the injury, and he's a guy that's not going to be valued on
Yeah.
draft
They're
day at
gonna
all.
ease him in.
I think Devontae Parker will be the number 1 receiver on
All right,
Miami.
we're
They will
at 0.
throw.
Liz,
My
give me 3.
sleepers. Okay, so I'm going to stick with later round guys because they took some good stuff. John Brown, Matthew mentioned Carson Palmer. John Brown, the receiver there in Arizona, they've been working together a lot, so I really like him. I also like Marvin Jones. I liked him a lot last year. He had some unfortunate injury issues. He seems to be healthy again, so I think he's a nice late round guy. Sticking in Cincinnati, Tyler Eifert. I think Gresham's not there anymore. Hopefully he's recovered from his shoulder, I believe, injury, so I think he has nice late round potential. You mentioned Kyrie Robinson. I think that's a great handcuff. So those are some of my late round guys.
Awesome. We could seriously do this for another 2 hours. Unfortunately, you all have schedules to keep, as do we. So round of applause for our fantastic panelists.